Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm the Reverend Jennifer Butler with Faith in Public Life, and I am here with my two amazing colleagues, Ida Makic and Jaslyn Gallego, and we're here to celebrate National Voter Registration Day. I'm really glad to have these guests on because they actually are on the front lines and they know exactly what's going on and have an incredible background to kind of help inspire us to do this work. But as we get started, let me just say, as a pastor and someone who does multi-faith work, why is it that faith communities should care about this election? I mean, I've talked to some people who, are worried and feel a bit cynical about our politics. I've talked to others who just confused at what to do. And I want to really lift up that voting is a matter of faith. It is a matter of hope. And it is a matter of faith because it's how we love our neighbors and it's how we strive for human dignity. And those are the two values at the heart of all of our religious traditions, love of neighbor and human dignity. And those cannot be brought to bear and cannot bear fruit without living in a democracy that where our leaders actually represent those values. Because every day, and we're going to be talking about this on this episode, every day, the policies that the people we elect put in place impact our daily lives. Sometimes we don't think about that. We're struggling, we're worried, we're anxious, but we're certainly seeing that now, right? We're certainly seeing that who we choose to represent us, whether it's at the local level or all the way to the top in the White House and members of Congress, makes a huge difference in our lives and in the lives of people we care about. And so if we're truly to live out our faith, voting is actually a spiritual discipline. It is a spiritual discipline, and it requires work. It requires thought. It requires engagement. It involves sometimes courage, as well. And it's all about hope. Some of you, I'm sure, have been following the fact that the civil rights icon and Congressman John Lewis just passed away. And in his final words to us, he said, "Democracy is not a state. It is an act." So it is something we have to always strive for. And I will say that, some of us who have grown up here in this country, we kind of have been lulled to sleep a little bit. We think that democracy may always be with us. And, it's kind of, we were born into it. And hey, this country is never going to change. But yes, it can change. And a lot of folks are saying this is the election of our lifetime, maybe the most important election in the history of our nation, in terms of making sure that we stay on the path to becoming a better democracy, which we've never fully been. We've never truly lived up to all of our ideals. And yet we've been striving toward that. And we're either, it's a choice between that or living in an autocracy where people don't have their human rights. So that's what we want to get to today and talk about, why this election is so important and what you need to know. So I want to turn to our two speakers today who are on the front lines, Jaslyn and Ida. And I was wondering if you could tell us first what you're doing, what is the organization you're working for, what does it do, and how you came to the work. I'd love to hear your stories because you both have these incredible journeys that I've been learning about. Ida, would you go first? You'll have to unmute, I think. There we go.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Thank you, Faith in Public Life, for hosting this super important topic also for conversations. And thank you, Reverend Jen, for moderating. And Jaslyn, it's a pleasure holding space with you today. A little bit about me. I immigrated as a war refugee to this country 24 years ago from Bosnia and Herzegovina. My country went through a civil unrest, predominantly Muslims in my country. As a Muslim going through what I experienced and moving into United States and immigrating here, thinking, right, that I am finally free, that I have certain rights, and making sure that my Muslim community is also represented and has a seat at the table, but not just a seat at the table, a voice at the table. We often talk about having a seat at the table, but also making sure that there's space where our voices are heard. So early on in my life, I started organizing, and within my community on simple things. I immigrated to Iowa, small town Iowa, and I love my home state. Currently, I'm living in Florida, and I noticed how my community predominantly likes to keep to themselves, right? We're very much isolated, and there's multiple reasons I think for that, but knowing that our struggles are so interconnected, that our faiths teach same values, almost identical values of being there for one another, looking out for your neighbor, and then societal and moral and ethical values as well that we share. Truly opened my eyes as to seeing how important it is that we are all working together as one human community and not just isolating ourselves. Because in all movement spaces, I think it's important that if one person is not represented, none of us are represented, right, equally. So that's kind of where my life's work has taken me. It's organizing on social justice, immigration, Muslims, and then pivoted into electoral work. I currently, my previous campaign, I worked for Senator Elizabeth Warren. Her campaign was very specific in a way that she really wanted to have a not so traditional campaign where it was uplifting voices in the communities that oftentimes in the primaries get left out. And she wanted to make sure that people from those communities are represented and their voices are brought to the table and to the forefront, which I really appreciate. And currently I work with Community Outreach Group. I'm the National Program Director on federal and state races. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. And just one word about what does that mean that you're working on state races? So you're just say one or two sentences about like what that entails.
So we oftentimes forget how important your local races are and what impact it has. You know, we focus heavily on every 4 years on the presidential, but we don't think about, you know, the governor's race and what that means for our state. What it means in Florida. And I'll take example, Florida being, because I'm here currently. Florida is a 1% state, right? Meaning that it's a swing state. It can go either way for either candidate. But what's important is making sure that you're voting for your local elected officials, issues that are predominantly in Florida. When we talk about climate change, right? Imagine what impact Florida has in terms of climate. So spreading out awareness and education on, especially in my communities, in the Muslim community, how important voting and is in particularly within your local races is, and how it affects you locally and immediately. You know, federal races obviously are super important too. It affects us on a different level, but having that comprehension of how it differentiates on a state and local and federal level is really important. And that is one thing that I think most marginalized communities, immigrant, Muslim, Black, Brown communities, is lacking in that educational aspect of it, of electoral work and how it actually functions. Because moving into this country, the lens that we look at things from, right, when we talk about policing, right, for someone like myself, where, and I'll just use the current moment that we're in, right, where Black Lives Matter movement is really predominant, where we've been having actions every weekend. For immigrant communities like my own, where policing was done a lot within the community, so police officers were hired from the communities that they were in. It was very much community led. It is completely different how it is here. So educating my community on what it is, how Black lives do matter, and how policing differentiates from, you know, where we're coming from into where we're at in this country. Same thing here in terms of election work and how it is important on state, local, federal level, and how it differentiates, because we tend to silo it and look at it from where we're coming from, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. What a great example with the intersectionality around Black Lives Matter and being able to translate that, and you have a lot from your context, the Muslim context, to teach us about how to do neighborhood and community policing. So that's kind of exciting to see the back and forth. All right, Jessalyn, let's bring you into the conversation. Tell us who you work for, what you're doing in terms of, mobilizing voters, and how you came to the work.
Awesome. Well, hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of the conversation. Ida, thank you so much for sharing that. That was super insightful. My name is Jessalyn Gallego. I'm the Florida coordinator for Vote Riders. We're a national 501c3 nonprofit organization that focuses on voter ID access. So voter ID, for those that do not know, is whatever your state defines as the identification that a voter is required to have in order to cast a vote. And as many as 25 million voting age Americans are predicted to not have a government issued ID. And so there is a bit of a gap in just that education portion and letting people know that they have to bring this piece of identification with them in order to cast their ballot. And then also there is a gap in making sure that we are meeting those that do not have an ID for either the financial barriers of not understanding the bureaucracy of different government offices to go through. And we're here to provide support for that. So I'm really excited to be speaking with you again. And I hope that we're able to provide, or I'm able to provide, some insightful information on voter ID and share some useful resources. Excellent.
And how did you start doing this work? How did you come to it? It's such exciting work. And a lot of times people are very intimidated to do it, but they shouldn't be. And tell us your story of how you came to it.
Oh, for sure. I think I started in college. I was really interested in nonprofit work. And so I delved into a bunch of different issues I was very passionate about, hunger relief, human trafficking, and learning more and more. I just learned about intersectionalities and how all of the issues that I cared so deeply about were so deeply interwoven, and I could not ignore that and ignore the intersectionality. And that pointed me towards politics and ensuring that we elect strong leaders in our communities that represent our communities very well, and that the community, trying to make sure that we all have a voice that is heard in every election, and ensuring from every level that we are involved in the process. And so after working on campaigns, I decided to really just get into the nooks and crannies, I guess, of how to get people out to vote and how to solve the issue of making sure that our democracy is just working at its finest. I always refer to voting as kind of like a problem-solving mechanism for a community. However, that only works if we're all getting out to vote and we're all working together, because if only a small percentage of the community is solving a problem, who's actually solving it, and then there are voices that are unheard. And so I wanted to get at that and make sure that those voices that have historically not turned out to vote are being heard in every election. And that's what really motivates me to work with Vote Riders, because we see that a lot of those that are at risk for not having a voter ID are the same communities that have historically faced hurdles in the voting process. It is those are the women, students, people of color all face different hurdles to getting ID access for one reason or another, be it like the socioeconomic factor of paying hundreds of dollars for the supporting documents to get an ID, or being that women are more likely to change our names when we get married than men are, and therefore not having a signature match. But there are different reasons to just make sure that we are informing our community and lifting up those that have historically not turned out to vote or not been able to because they've face more restrictions than others.
That is really great examples there. It's so important for people to understand that. So maybe we can just stay on you for a minute, Jocelyn, and you can tell us a little bit, like, what's at stake for your community, for the Latino community, and for the 25 million people that y'all are trying to register. Like, what's at stake for them in this election?
Yeah, for sure. So Hispanic voters are projected to become the largest minority group, accounting for 13% of eligible voters. And there's something to be said about that. There is something to be said about the fact that Latinos are the fastest growing voting bloc in the state of Florida, with the number of us reaching 2 million during the 2018 election cycle. Nationally, we're now the largest minority. voting group, and there is so much power in the Latinx vote. But yet there are major voting rights that we have to acknowledge before we even start tackling the issues. Because it just all goes back to, the democratic process of making sure that we are all staying engaged and getting that final end result that we want to see that most represents us. Right off the bat, we're less likely to have a generational tradition of voting. My parents migrated from Colombia, and I watched my dad vote when I grew up. My mom is a permanent resident, so I only had my dad's example kind of guiding me, but there aren't like these intergenerational, this is what grandma did on election day. I don't really have that for the US election. So we kind of rely on ourselves so much more to lift each other up and just share the bits and pieces of knowledge that we have and really educate ourselves, be self-motivated. And it's really tougher when we are facing more hurdles. We're more likely to be purged at the voting rolls because we all have we're really likely to have like similar names, I guess, that get purged. So if there are duplicates, you'll get purged. So please check your voter registration status. We're most likely to be first generation voters. And then here in Central Florida, Vote Riders has been working a lot with the Puerto Rican diaspora after Hurricane Maria, of those that came to Central Florida and have been having such difficulty in receiving documents because the birth certificates were invalidated in Puerto Rico in 2010. And so if you didn't update your birth certificate within those 7 years, and I always tell people I wouldn't. What am I using my birth certificate for? I'm not using it to drive. I'm not using it for anything. It's just not happening. It's just not on my to-do list today. So I understand that a lot of people either lost it, when their home was damaged, or they just never got around to getting that new birth certificate because they had an old copy. So, it makes sense to me. But we saw a month-long delay after these natural disasters, and it has just become, it was so difficult to be able to get people their supporting documents, to get them IDs. And it has been a whole hurdle, but it's gotten easier and easier as, the Puerto Rican Federal Affairs Office opened up in Orlando. And so there are things like that we don't even think about why it might be an issue for Puerto Rican voters to obtain ID in Central Florida. About what's happening in other states. There were cases in Georgia and Atlanta where the DMV actually took people's IDs and claiming that they weren't real and having them answer trick driver's questions. So there's definitely a lot at stake for us. We definitely have to be able to educate ourselves and then educate our community members as well. Like I said, we don't have a lot of generational knowledge that stems back to our great grandmas voting on election day. So we have to start making those traditions, I guess, and lifting each other up. I've seen a lot of power come from our community, just leading different coalitions and getting really creative with how we spread voting information. I've seen caravanas that have been put on in Central Florida of cars that are painted "Get out to vote" and with voting dates on them. So we've gotten very creative. There is a lot at stake, definitely. Ida was saying, the next POTUS or the current POTUS, if reelected, will make major changes or choices that are going to be very crucial to our community. So for our community, temporary protective status is one, just so many different things that are just so pertinent to just right now of decision-making of whether or not we are reelecting the current administration or voting in. But it all matters, and it matters at the federal level, the local level, the state level. We have to make sure that we're playing a constant role in our politics.
That's really, really exciting to hear. And Ida, you've touched on this too. How do you speak to voters in your community that are maybe reticent to vote? How do you help them understand the importance for their lives? And you've talked about the importance too of local and federal. What do you say to them specifically? What is the election about?
Yeah, no, that is that's a great point, actually. And I'd like to lead by saying that Muslims are not a monolith, right? Muslims are issue-based voters. We care deeply about the systematic racism that's built into our current laws, our policies. institutions that affect housing, healthcare, education, our criminal justice system. These are the issues, right? We care about the economy. Some of the community members come from the highest net worth families, but then we also have some of that come from the lowest income families. I believe it's almost a third of Muslims live at or below the poverty line, right? So Muslims care about the access to healthcare. Some of our community members are first responders currently during this global pandemic, and some of them are patients that are affected by this global pandemic and that have very limited access to healthcare. So we care about, issues that affect our community is not just issues that affect Muslim community. They affect most of our communities. And I think I pivot back to the education, right? I think education is very much needed. Education has been the focal point of a lot of our Muslim organizations across the country into making sure that our communities are educated as to how it affects, how each administration that's elected affects them from nationally to locally, right? Let's take a moment and just talk about the first executive order that was issued by the current administration. It was the Muslim ban, right? That affected my community greatly. And after that, the administration just kind of continued and spiraled downwards for many of our communities intersectionally. So thinking about prohibiting the population of entire countries from coming to the United States, it's not only morally wrong, it does not make our country any safer. It's just another tool that has been used to abuse power, right? And if we look at today, worldwide, right, we have close to 80 million people that are displaced across this world, right? And so the current administration has reduced the refugee resettlement ceiling to its lowest level in decades. So when we're kind of narrowing it down and granularly looking at these issues, it's not just a Muslim issue thing, right? It's all of our communities. All of them are affected. We're still in the throes of a global pandemic with no end in sight. We still don't know what long-term health impacts of COVID-19 are, and this current administration's responses to this crisis has been completely incompetent and morally bankrupt. So I think all of us, coming from faith, right, as a woman of faith, it's a moral obligation, right? And I think, Reverend, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, that I think it's incumbent on all of us to really look at the effects, the long-term effects that this current election is going to have after November, and really ask ourselves, have we done everything that we can? In my faith, particularly in my faith, God tells us, tie your camel and then trust in God, right? So for us, we have to make sure that we're tying our camel real tight and ensuring then that we've done all the work necessary and then putting our faith in God. Are we there yet? I think we are waking up out of a long slumber, right? We're making some amazing changes. And I think it's gonna take all of us this coming November to make sure that we are protecting all of our communities and looking at it globally and how it's affecting us.
Yeah, so when you look at the issues that both of you have raised, really, you're saying that voting is a matter of life and death. It really is, So it's a matter of whether a refugee can get into this country. It's a matter of how people are treated once they get here. It's a matter of whether you die of a pandemic that could have been minimized and prevented. It's a matter of whether 30 million people have healthcare or don't have healthcare. 30 million more people, whether those 30 million or 40 million lose healthcare that now have it and will lose it if things change. So this really is a matter of life and death, which makes it a matter of our faith. And there's some particular challenges this year that I would love to hear you both talk about how we overcome. So we have the pandemic, we have the political climate where, there's some intimidation, and there have been laws passed to make it harder for people to vote. And you all have referenced those. So what do people need to know for this election, given these challenges that we're facing right now? I know, I've applied to get my ballot to vote by mail. And, I was just spending some time trying to look out now, when should I get that ballot? I want to make sure that it comes on time and that I put it in the mail right away. I want to make sure, nothing goes wrong there. So What do you advise people to do in order to prepare themselves now for the spiritual discipline of voting? Jocelyn, do you want to go?
Sure. Yeah. So we have to keep in mind that we're voting for elected officials at every level. We need a strong response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the political climate alike. And we need to urge our friends and family to go vote for elected officials that they personally feel speak to their values on how to solve these complex issues. And with that being said, it's always so trivial to focus on the presidential election. However, we also need to think about state and local races, like we've mentioned. When we're voting on local races, we feel the results of these quickly when emergencies happen. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, at the local level, we're electing public officials who will fight for the resources like testing sites and implementing guidelines for our safety, like wearing masks or social distancing. And then at the state level, we're electing those who make the decisions in response to how our job market will be affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is going to be crucial with small businesses and state employment in mind. So you're voting at every level. And with that in mind, there are definitely some hurdles, and it's going to be a different election than we've seen in the past. So please just make a plan to vote if you have not already, and decide how you're voting. Like Reverend said, she's voting through mail. I typically request my vote by mail ballot, and then I like to hand it off in person at a drop-off location during early voting the week leading up to the election. And that way I get 2 stickers, not just 1. So that is my personal perk, and that is definitely what I recommend. It's a lot of fun to get a quick selfie and not have to stand in line. So if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out to Faith in Public Life. They have an amazing voter guide where they have all these resources that you can use. We have a helpline number too. I can definitely drop it in the chat too if you're looking for like very last minute help the day of and you want to talk to someone on the phone. That can definitely be a helpful resource. But yeah, I think that it goes without saying that like a lot is at stake right now, but we need to prepare ourselves on how to vote. And we have the tools here for you. So yeah, definitely if you have not checked out Faith in Public Life's voter guide, do so because it has all of the good things that you need in order to register to vote and then to know how to vote.
Awesome. Thanks for the shout out there. And there's also a website I understand called vote.org that is helpful in terms of the particularities of your state and your locale. We have a text system too, and it's tailoring to your state and to your area. So that will help as well. So make sure that you put your name and sign up when you go to our website. And the link should be there in the chat bar for you to use. Ida, what are you urging people to look out for in terms of this year? And how do we make sure each individual, what do individuals need to do to make sure that their vote counts?
Yeah, I think everything, I echo literally word by word what Jocelyn said. Thank you for that. Vote.org is an amazing resource. To just add a little bit to what Jocelyn said is there's been this huge myth, I think not just in my community overall, I've been hearing it on the ground is, is vote by mail safe? Is it gonna count? And I really keep having to emphasize this. Vote by mail is safe, y'all. We should trust our post office, and we should trust them to do their job. And I think that whichever way you choose to vote, whether that is voting early, because there's voting early locations, y'all. So utilize that. Vote by mail. Like Reverend Jen said, I've also requested my ballot to vote by mail. But I know my partner, my spouse, he loves to vote in person. He loves to go in, and it's kind of a tradition thing ever since he's gotten his citizenship for him to do. So it is very personal, and I support that. But either way, I think that emphasizing one thing that I want to try to do with my community this year is called vote tripling. I don't know if you ladies ever heard of what vote tripling is. It was this theory that we used in one of the primary elections on one cycle that I worked, where you stand in high traffic canvas areas or in the targeted precincts and make sure that you ask 3 people, hey, can you text 3 people or get 3 people to come out to vote? How do I now break it down to my community? So and I'm active in almost every mosque that's within my range in the greater Tampa Bay area. is ensuring that I have asked in each space that I'm in within my community, at least 3 people, do they have a plan to vote?
Wow.
If they do not have, and I ask them, what's your plan to vote? How are you voting, right? Have you registered? And then how are you voting? And if they haven't, then I point them in some direction, right? And then asking them to get 3 people. So it's that relational organizing, and I really want to try to see how much of it is working within our communities. But also, I want to shout out the Muslim community nationally is working on a million Muslim voter turnout. It's a large campaign. It's a historic campaign. Organizations such as Mgage, Empower, My Muslim Vote, all of us have come together and try to drive this million Muslim voters campaign this election cycle. So that is a little bit of what we're doing. I'm excited for it, and hopefully we make a difference for all of our communities.
Great. Yeah. Let's what's helpful to you brought up sort of like an additional topic of like, we need to have our own plan, but there are things we can do to triple our voting power or, even more. And so are there other ideas to put on the table? Like one I ran across, my church here in Maryland is engaged in a state-based campaign where they write postcards. We're all picking up postcards, and we write postcards to voters because that has been proven to work and to encourage people. So I'm really proud that my church is doing that. My pastor, who I work with closely, and sometimes preach, but he led the way on this and found this great group. What other ways, if people want to like triple their voting power, I love that, it's like triple your money, triple your voting power. Are there other things that we can do? Other ways to sign up?
Definitely.
And I think too that our pastors that are participating in our Faithful Voter program also have plans and are working with their congregations through our pledge card program and 4 states that we work in. But are there any other ideas, other things people should be thinking about, like along those lines?
Okay. So there are, you can lead any sort of an action and get creative with your community. At Vote Riders, we work in a coalition to reach at-risk voters who might need help getting an ID. So that looks like partnering with federal agencies, shelters, nonprofit organizations throughout the state. However, an essential way of how we also reach voters is having community members jump in. My favorite option right now are letter writing parties. And I recently learned from our volunteer manager that like voters love seeing handwriting on letters because it feels super personalized. It's being sent to you. It's a piece of mail that got to you. How special is that? We host really fun letter writing parties. Most recently, we hosted the LA Broadway cast of Hamilton. And our Hamilton ambassadors have done such a cool job of basically making volunteers have a lot of fun while also writing letters through like song and dances from the play, which has been really fun. But you can do this like yourself too. It doesn't have to be necessarily like, you can jump on to Vote Riders, but you can also do a letter writing party where you have like a Zoom party with your friends and you're playing a playlist, and then you make it fun and creative and personalized to you. So definitely find a way to get involved if it's something that you want to do, and make it enticing and make it special for your friends and family.
What fun.
We had this, everything that Jaslyn's saying is really cool. One of the things that we've noticed, right, especially with the older community, when COVID-19 first started in March? Was it March? Gosh, it's been so long. One of the things that we were trying to figure out, right, my community, not necessarily do they have resources for online Zoom events. How do we make sure that they still get that sense of community, right? So I think that helped us kind of get ready into this digital organizing realm currently, right? Where we are sending out regular weekly newsletters to our communities in different languages. I think we now have identified each space, each mosque has identified different languages and what their congregates are speaking, so they can make sure to tailor within those languages. But in addition to that, the caravans that Jaslyn was saying, we're gonna be doing that as well. We have drive-through. We've been donating food to everybody from certain mosques, but also holding a table, an educational booth, so to speak, on making sure that you are registered to vote. If you need guidance, slate cards, things like that. And then one of the organizers, this was really fun. So a lot of the immigrants that come from, my community, we use to communicate with folks back home, this app called WhatsApp. So we noticed that everyone's on WhatsApp. How can we utilize this tool to reach as many people? So we started a WhatsApp-a-thon. So if you're on WhatsApp, you send a message or create a group with your WhatsApp and get them to actually bring more folks in. And then we do an educational, whether that's around, local candidates, where they are at on issues, register to vote. Like currently that's been a push on our WhatsApp-a-thon. So things like that to really kind of identify the needs and what it is that your community is currently using to be able to tailor it to them and that messaging to them to just get out that vote.
I love that. Goodness, and we're all at home, and it's hard to have a social life anymore. So like pick up some postcards or some letters or go to Jocelyn's website and participate in the mail-in program. And there's so much we can be doing. Some of my neighbors are actually doing this too. Before my church found this program, I learned that some of my neighbors are at home writing postcards. And one guy was bragging he did 100 a day, which apparently is quite a lot because you're pouring yourself into these postcards. So I was impressed. And it's another way, I think, of helping us even get through these times. It's that sort of sense of solidarity, of coming together. Again, this is a very spiritual practice. This is how we put our values in action. It's how we love our neighbor. It's how we create community and become the beloved community that we're charged with being. Are there any last words of hope that you want to leave people with? This is, it has been the longest several months. So what words of hope? And we've got, a tough road to hoe in the next couple of weeks. So how do you help people feel hopeful in this moment that their lives can make a difference?
So I think that, it just really comes down to the individual action. There really is so much that we can do. Like you said, there's one man at your church that has written 100 letters a day. That is so incredibly much. And so especially here in the state of Florida, I don't know, are you both in Florida as well, or is it just in Florida, I-4 is notoriously known as the I-4 corridor in Central Florida is known as the road to the White House nationally, because typically the landscape of how we respond to an election, our results dictate the landscape of the national election so much. In the state of North Carolina, for example, and it's not just Florida, it's not just, the swing state. States like North Carolina, where in 2016, the presidential election results were actually decided between 5 people at every precinct. 5 people, that's you and a group of friends, you and your family going out to vote. So check in with those that are closest to you and, speak to them about the issues that they care about, because everyone is truly passionate about something, and find the common ground of making sure that it's important, telling them that it's important to them too and important to their life. To make sure that they vocalize the change that they would like to see in this world, and that they have the power to be one of those 5 people that will influence.
That's incredible. That statistics makes me jump out of my chair. I had never heard that number before. Oh my goodness. Elections are so close these days. And so your vote actually matters all the more. It always matters, but this is intense. It actually matters. You could change the universe with your voting. Well, I want to thank you both for being here. We're coming to the end of our time. And again, I just keep picturing the civil rights icon, John Lewis, on the eve of his passing, going out to Black Lives Matter Plaza here in Washington, D.C., to look at what he saw was the future of the country coming together and young people getting out and organizing. And here's a man who had nearly died several times securing the right for his people to vote, because that is where political power and change would start. And he was not discouraged one bit in this moment. I mean, there's certainly a lot to get us down, but he was hopeful in that moment and wanted to look out and see the future. And then reminding us on his deathbed or after his death, when he published his op-ed, that democracies are made. They don't just exist. and continue on their own. So we are making history with our feet and with our actions, with our prayers, with our hopefulness. And it's a real honor to be with you too, and to hear the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for being at the front lines and for changing history. And to all our listeners, you're going to change history too. So thanks for coming today and sharing lunchtime with us. And onward ho. Blessings to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great being on. So truly appreciate it.
Good. Oh, so glad. Yeah.